The desert air was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Dust swirled across the trail, catching the last rays of the sun as it sank low behind the mountains. The land stretched endlessly, harsh and unforgiving, yet it held stories of struggle, heartbreak, and sometimes, unexpected redemption. On this forgotten stretch of the Wild West, a little girl sat all alone. She was no more than 7, small and frail, her dress ripped at the hem, her shoes torn, her hair matted with dirt and wind. She clutched a worn-out doll to her chest, its stuffing peeking out from one side, as though it too had endured the hardships of the road. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears, and her lips trembled with the weight of hunger and fear. She had been left there, abandoned in the wilderness where wagons rolled by and men on horseback galloped without pause. At first, she cried out, her small voice carried on the wind, pleading for help. But riders looked down, their eyes filled with unease, and rode on. Some whispered that she was cursed, that taking her in would mean misfortune. Others simply turned their faces away, unwilling to carry the burden of another mouth to feed. Hours stretched into an eternity, and as the sky darkened, the girl's hope dimmed with it. She buried her face into her doll's torn fabric, whispering to it as though it were her only companion in the world. The trail grew quieter as night crept in. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the air grew colder, biting against her thin frame. She hugged her knees, shivering, waiting for an end she feared was close. Yet fate, as it often does, had other plans. From beyond the bend, the rhythmic pounding of hooves grew louder. At first, she thought it was another rider who would pass her by, another shadow that would not stop. But the sound slowed. Dust rose in the air as a tall chestnut stallion came into view, its coat shining like copper even in the fading light. Astride it was a man unlike the others who had ridden past. His hat was wide-brimmed, his boots polished, his vest tailored from fine leather. The horse's saddle glimmered with silver engravings, a mark of wealth in a land where most struggled for bread. This was Jacob McGraw, known far and wide as the richest cowboy in the territory. He owned vast stretches of land, herds of cattle beyond counting, and a mansion that rose from the plains like a fortress. Yet for all his riches, his heart was known to be heavy. Years ago, he had lost his beloved wife and the child they had prayed for had never come. Though surrounded by abundance, his nights were hollow, his days carried the weight of loneliness. His name carried power, but behind it was a man who longed for something more than wealth. When his eyes fell upon the girl, he slowed his horse to a stop. For a long moment, he simply stared. Her fragile body, the doll she clung to, the hopelessness etched into her face, it struck something deep within him, a place he thought had long been buried. Sliding down from his stallion, Jacob walked toward her, his boots crunching on the dirt. "Where's your family, little one?" His voice was deep, steady, but softened with concern. The girl lifted her head. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Only a silent shake of her head, her eyes wide, filled with a fear that cut through the heart of even a hardened cowboy. Jacob knelt down, pulling off his long coat. The heavy fabric smelled faintly of leather and smoke, but when he draped it over her shoulders, warmth replaced her shivering. She looked at him, her tears catching the last of the light, and for the first time in days, perhaps weeks, she felt something she had forgotten: safety. "You're coming with me," Jacob said firmly. He lifted her, gently, as though she were as fragile as glass, and set her upon his horse. The stallion shifted but did not resist. Jacob climbed up behind her, steadying her small form against his chest. As they rode through the desert night, stars spread like diamonds above them. The girl nestled into his coat, finally allowing exhaustion to close her eyes. By the time they reached Jacob's ranch, the hour was late. Lanterns glowed against the wooden fences, and ranch hands paused in surprise as their boss returned with a child in his arms. Whispers started immediately. The richest man in the county, who had no family of his own, had brought home an orphan. Some wondered if he had lost his mind. Others said it was charity. But Jacob ignored the murmurs. He carried the girl inside his sprawling home, a mansion too big for one man, and laid her in a bed softer than anything she had ever known. For the first time in what felt like forever, she slept in peace. Morning brought questions, but Jacob had already made up his mind. He provided her with food, warm bread, milk, and eggs fresh from his own land. He had her cleaned, her tangled hair brushed, her torn dress replaced with something simple but beautiful. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Slowly, the fear in her eyes gave way to curiosity, and then to something even stronger, trust. Days turned into weeks. The mansion that had once been silent began to fill with laughter. The girl, now with ribbons in her hair and color in her cheeks, ran through its halls, her giggles echoing against the high ceilings. She drew pictures by the fireplace, sang songs as she fed the horses, and listened wide-eyed to Jacob's stories of the land. He, in turn, discovered a joy he thought had been lost to him. He found himself smiling more often, sitting by her side as she spoke of dreams and games, teaching her how to ride, how to whistle to call a horse, how to sit tall in the saddle like a true rancher's daughter. Word spread across the county that the orphan girl had become Jacob McGraw's daughter in all but name. Some said he spoiled her, giving her more than she could ever need. But those who knew Jacob best understood, what he gave her went beyond riches. He gave her a home, protection, and above all, love. One evening, years later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, the girl, now older, her face radiant with life, stood beside Jacob on the porch of the ranch. They watched the cattle graze in the distance, the land stretching endlessly before them. She slipped her hand into his, smiling softly. "Do you remember the night you found me?" she asked. Jacob's eyes, weathered with age, softened. "I'll never forget it," he replied. She looked at him with gratitude that words could not capture. "That was the night my life truly began. Because that's when I found my father." Jacob's heart swelled with pride, his chest rising with the weight of emotions he rarely spoke aloud. For all his cattle, land, and gold, nothing compared to the treasure he had found that night on the lonely trail. He had not just saved a child. In saving her, he had saved himself. And so, the story of the orphan girl and the wealthiest cowboy was told for generations, not as a tale of riches or land, but as proof that sometimes the greatest fortune is not in what a man owns, but in the love he gives, and the family he finds when he least expects it.